Back then, survival came first, even if it meant eating rats, roadkill, or banned ingredients. These meals were once everyday staples during the Great Depression, but today they're illegal for reasons ranging from health hazards to animal rights laws. Back in the days when supermarket shelves weren't exactly overflowing with choices, families found protein wherever they could, even if that meant looking up into backyard trees for their next meal. Squirrel Stew. Yes, these fluffy critters, nowadays famous mostly for raiding bird feeders, were often simmered slowly with root vegetables, onions, and herbs until tender. Considered lean, flavorful, and surprisingly nutritious, squirrels were not only abundant but a staple meat source when grocery money was scarce during the Depression. Interestingly, cookbooks from the era recommended soaking squirrel meat overnight in salt water or vinegar to reduce its distinctive gamey taste, resulting in something remarkably close to chicken, though Grandma probably never admitted it wasn't chicken when company came by. Modern laws recognize squirrels as protected game animals, closely regulated to ensure ecological balance and disease control. After all, nothing ruins nostalgia faster than discovering dinner might have rabies. In Depression-era America, protein was at a premium, and butcher shops quietly began offering an unconventional choice to economically strained families: horse meat. Marketed discreetly as an affordable alternative to beef, horse meat steaks, sausages, and roasts made regular appearances on dinner tables. Recipes often called for marinating the meat overnight to tenderize its notoriously tougher texture, while seasoning with garlic, bay leaves, and red wine could cleverly disguise its slightly sweeter, iron-rich taste. Interestingly, newspapers of the time published editorials praising horse meat's nutritional value, hoping to encourage skeptical diners to saddle up and give it a try. However, public acceptance faded rapidly after World War II, as horses transitioned fully from livestock status to beloved pets, sparking a cultural backlash against consuming an animal more commonly pictured pulling carts or carrying cowboys into sunsets. Today, slaughtering horses for food is banned nationwide, driven by both ethical concerns and potential contamination from medications given to animals not raised for consumption. The FDA classifies horses as companion animals, effectively shutting the stable door on commercial sale of horse meat. In tough economic times, resourcefulness often triumphed over squeamishness, and few dishes captured this gritty ingenuity better than the infamous Roadkill Stew. During the Great Depression, families faced with empty pantries saw opportunity in freshly struck animals: deer, rabbits, raccoons, lying roadside, turning these unfortunate encounters into nourishing meals. After inspection, mostly visual, food safety rules were looser back then, the carcasses were quickly skinned, cleaned, and tossed into pots bubbling with potatoes, onions, carrots, and herbs. Cookbooks from the 1930s humorously cautioned cooks to select only recently deceased creatures, advising that tire tracks were a less-than-ideal seasoning. Surprisingly, this improvised delicacy wasn't just rural folklore. City folks, too, adopted roadkill recipes as an economical alternative to expensive butcher shop meat. Today, however, collecting roadside meals has moved from economical practicality to legal controversy. Many states now strictly regulate or outright forbid harvesting roadkill, citing health hazards from bacteria, parasites, and unknown diseases, not to mention wildlife preservation laws designed to prevent poaching disguised as scavenging. If you've ever watched a raccoon tip over your garbage cans, you might find it hard to imagine inviting one to dinner. Yet, during the Great Depression, resourceful cooks did exactly that, preparing raccoon meat as routinely as chicken. Back then, hunting or trapping raccoons wasn't just a hobby, it was survival. Cookbooks advised carefully cleaning and soaking the meat overnight, typically in vinegar or salt water, to remove the greasy, gamey flavor before roasting it with sweet potatoes or simmering it into a hearty stew. Interestingly, raccoon was even featured prominently in community cook-offs and rural Sunday dinners, considered delicious enough to appear in popular recipes alongside pork and beef. However, the days of openly dining on raccoon meat faded with tightening health and wildlife regulations. Today, consuming raccoons is strongly discouraged or explicitly illegal in many states due to serious concerns about rabies and parasites. Wildlife agencies emphasize that raccoons, those nocturnal bandits once invited to dinner, carry diseases that cooking doesn't always eliminate. When food budgets shrank dramatically in Depression-era America, backyard creatures found themselves promoted from pests to pot roast. Among these unlikely dinner guests was the humble opossum, famously cooked into dishes such as Opossum Pot Roast. Preparation involved meticulous attention, first soaking the meat overnight in salted water, then carefully removing excess fat before slowly roasting alongside sweet potatoes, onions, carrots, and apples. Cookbooks from that time proudly featured detailed opossum recipes, reassuring skeptical home chefs that the meat was tender, mild-flavored, and almost as good as pork, though likely no opossum ever felt flattered by the comparison. Historically significant in southern states, the opossum was even humorously honored at community possum suppers, where neighbors gathered, possibly wondering if dinner had recently visited their own porch. However, modern dining etiquette and strict wildlife regulations have largely removed opossum from American menus. Health officials today strongly advise against eating opossums due to risks of diseases like leptospirosis and parasites unaffected by standard cooking temperatures. Many states now regulate or ban trapping and consumption of these marsupials altogether, highlighting safety concerns over nostalgia. When desperation tightened its grip in the Great Depression, even the backyard robins and sparrows became fair game. Commonly known as songbirds, these feathered neighbors found themselves starring unwillingly in Depression-era dishes. Families employed homemade snares, nets, and carefully aimed slingshots to secure their tiny meals. Once captured, the birds, typically robins, sparrows, or blackbirds, were plucked, gutted, and roasted whole over open fires or baked with potatoes and onions into miniature pies. Interestingly, a 1930s household recipe even recommended skewering songbirds, seasoning lightly, and cooking rapidly, likely the original, less glamorous predecessor to today's fancy hors d'oeuvres. But this culinary trend, born purely of necessity rather than preference, soon faced heavy legal scrutiny. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act, established earlier but strictly enforced post-Depression, outlawed hunting, capturing, or consuming migratory songbirds to prevent their declining populations. Today, violating these regulations could result in hefty fines or even imprisonment, making songbird skewers a costly dish indeed. In an era when practicality trumped sentimentality, even the family pet wasn't always off-limits as a main course. Pet rabbits for meat became common during the Great Depression, as families raised them not just for fluffy companionship, but also as a convenient dinner solution. Surprisingly tender and mild-tasting, rabbit meat was commonly fried, stewed, or baked into pies after soaking overnight in buttermilk or vinegar to reduce gamminess, because nothing ruins a Depression-era Sunday dinner quite like unwanted backyard flavor. Raising rabbits was uniquely economical, as these fluffy companions conveniently doubled as livestock, feeding on grass and garden scraps and multiplying at legendary speeds. There's a reason we still joke about rabbits' reproductive enthusiasm today. However, attitudes toward rabbits changed dramatically in post-war America. As people increasingly viewed these long-eared animals strictly as cuddly household companions rather than dinner options, cultural taboos strengthened significantly. Modern urban zoning regulations often explicitly forbid slaughtering animals considered pets, making it not just socially questionable but legally risky to prepare rabbit dinners at home in populated areas. Preserving meat was crucial when refrigeration wasn't an option, so Depression-era families turned to unpasteurized home-canned meats, a kitchen practice that involved cooking meat cuts, placing them in reused glass jars, then sealing tightly with wax or rudimentary lids. Housewives proudly displayed pantry shelves stocked with jars filled with pork, beef, or chicken simmered simply in their own juices, offering a reliable meal source during the harshest months. Although economical, this preservation method was essentially playing culinary roulette. Without pressure cookers, botulism thrived unseen, sometimes delivering more than families bargained for at dinner, After all, homemade pickles were tasty, paralysis not so much. In fact, botulism outbreaks from improperly canned meats contributed significantly to the establishment of strict federal regulations mandating pressure canning and pasteurization to safeguard consumers. By mid-century, labels, expiration dates, and government oversight replaced wax seals and guesswork, legally forbidding unpasteurized home-canned meats from commercial sale and strongly discouraging them domestically. Before neatly packaged pork chops arrived wrapped in cellophane at supermarkets, families in Depression-era America took matters and meat cleavers into their own hands. Home-slaughtered pigs without inspection weren't just rural tradition, they were economic necessity, a direct route from the backyard pig pen to dinner plates nationwide. Neighbors often gathered together, turning butchering day into a social event, perhaps the original farm-to-table movement, minus the trendy menus. Pork cuts were carefully salted, smoked, cured, or canned in cellars without official oversight, and sausages stuffed by hand provided protein all winter. Interestingly, nearly every part found a use, including rendering fat for lard or transforming scraps into sausage, a testament to Depression-era thriftiness. Yet these home-slaughtered practices carried hidden dangers. Unsupervised slaughter led to contamination risks, including trichinosis outbreaks and food poisoning incidents that pushed authorities toward regulation. Today, selling home-slaughtered pork without USDA inspection isn't just risky. It's illegal nationwide, intended to protect public health and ensure humane animal treatment standards. In the humid summers of the South and Midwest during the Depression, resourceful cooks dipped ladles into bubbling pots filled with a delicacy now hidden behind a shield of wildlife protections, wild turtle soup made from snapping turtles. Highly regarded for its supposed medicinal properties, this dish combined turtle meat with vegetables and spices in a slow-cooked broth, sometimes enriched with sherry, giving it a sophisticated flair despite its humble swamp origins. Catching snapping turtles required skill and caution. These prehistoric-looking creatures packed jaws powerful enough to snap broom handles, making dinner prep almost as dangerous as it was economical. Cookbooks of the era suggested that turtle meat contained 7 distinct flavors, though skeptical diners joked it tasted mostly like swamp chicken. Overhunting and declining populations eventually forced state governments to step in, enacting strict laws and bans protecting snapping turtles from commercial harvest. Today, turtle trapping is highly regulated or illegal altogether in several states, particularly where species are considered endangered or threatened. In the leanest years of the Great Depression, nothing edible went to waste. Not even the parts most people today wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, like boiled squirrel heads. This peculiar dish, particularly favored in southern Appalachia, involved simmering squirrel heads slowly, extracting tender meat from cheeks and even brains, both prized as delicacies rich in nutrients. Preparation required patience, typically slow-boiled with salt, onions, and herbs until the meat easily slipped off the bone, a culinary adventure often joked about as the original head-to-tail eating philosophy. Eating squirrel heads wasn't merely a quirky rural curiosity, but a necessity-driven culinary solution. During times when meat was scarce, discarding any edible part was economically unthinkable. However, modern regulations strongly discourage consuming squirrel brains, not merely because it's unsettling dinner table conversation, but due to legitimate health concerns. Studies revealed a disturbing connection between squirrel brain consumption and a rare fatal neurological disorder known as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, a cousin of the infamous mad cow disease. During the hardest years of the Great Depression, desperate hunger led Americans to pursue protein sources that nowadays would make your local health inspector faint, like bat meat. Although bats weren't common dinner fare, isolated accounts from this challenging era document people trapping and roasting these nocturnal creatures, usually out of sheer necessity rather than culinary curiosity. Preparation involved singeing the fur off bats, an image probably best left to history books, and roasting or boiling the meat thoroughly to combat its intensely gamey taste. Some Depression-era home chefs optimistically suggested marinating bat meat overnight, perhaps hoping to mask flavors described politely as unusually pungent. Humorously, no cookbook of the era prominently advertised bat recipes, suggesting even desperate cooks preferred to keep bat suppers under wraps. Today, however, American laws explicitly forbid hunting or consuming bats, recognizing their critical role in ecosystems as insect controllers and pollinators. Additionally, bats carry diseases like rabies and histoplasmosis, making their consumption extremely dangerous and firmly illegal. While city rats today might prompt a frantic call to pest control, desperate times during the Great Depression transformed these rodents from street menace to last resort protein. Eating rat meat wasn't common practice, but urban families facing starvation did indeed resort to capturing and cooking these widely detested animals. Rat meat required meticulous cleaning, soaking in brine or vinegar, and thorough cooking at high temperatures, usually roasted or simmered into stews heavily seasoned to disguise its origins. Historical accounts indicate that rat dinners emerged mostly from extreme necessity rather than culinary experimentation, with some cooks humorously admitting the biggest challenge was convincing diners it tasted almost like rabbit, provided they didn't think too hard about it. Naturally, health concerns arose from consuming urban rodents, notorious carriers of disease, think plague and leptospirosis, conditions more serious than indigestion after Thanksgiving dinner. These legitimate dangers pushed health authorities to unequivocally declare rat meat illegal and unsafe, permanently closing down any possibility of a rat roast revival. Modern laws reflect clear public health priorities, strictly forbidding consumption of rodents, classifying them as dangerous vermin rather than viable food sources. During the hardest days of the Great Depression, families discovered ways to use every bit of available food, including parts that modern cooks might discreetly discard, leading to dishes like blood soup made from chickens or pigs. This thick, savory stew was surprisingly popular, especially among immigrant communities where wasting animal parts was practically a sin. To prepare the soup, fresh blood was immediately whisked with vinegar to prevent clotting, then simmered slowly alongside onions, garlic, spices, and grains, yielding a protein-rich, iron-packed meal designed to stretch tight budgets further than your granddad's wallet on payday. Interestingly, similar dishes remain popular today in European cuisines like Polish czernina or Filipino dinuguan, suggesting Depression-era Americans weren't alone in turning blood into hearty comfort food. But as food safety awareness grew, authorities tightened regulations on dishes using animal blood, citing serious risks of pathogens like Salmonella or E. coli if improperly handled. Today, restaurants or commercial kitchens serving blood-based recipes require strict health inspections and special handling permits, meaning grandma's favorite soup might now invite an unwanted visit from the health inspector. In cities struggling through the Great Depression, hungry families frequently turned to their local waterways for sustenance, pulling dinner straight from rivers that today would make even industrial chemists hesitate. Eating fish from polluted rivers wasn't exactly gourmet dining, but it was survival cooking at its most pragmatic. Catfish, carp, and perch were typically breaded, fried, or baked with onions and potatoes to mask muddy flavors, a method that probably made diners thankful the river's taste didn't seep through too strongly. Even back then, though, residents jokingly admitted their fish dinners had a hint of motor oil, hardly a selling point, but better than going hungry. Public health warnings of the era were minimal. Pollutants like mercury, PCBs, and industrial chemicals weren't widely understood yet, leaving fishermen blissfully unaware of their toxic supper. Eventually, environmental awareness and science caught up to common sense. By the 1970s, federal laws like the Clean Water Act drastically limited fishing in contaminated waters, explicitly labeling certain rivers off-limits due to severe health risks linked to cancer and neurological disorders. When empty stomachs growled louder than consciences, desperate Depression-era families sometimes turned to stealing eggs from wild bird nests, transforming survival into a risky game of climbing trees and dodging angry mother birds. Children often undertook this daring pantry raid, carefully selecting nests perched high above the ground, collecting delicate eggs from robins, sparrows, or doves. These tiny eggs were either scrambled or fried, occasionally mixed into baked goods or cooked into miniature omelets, providing valuable protein at virtually no cost, except perhaps the occasional scratch or angry peck. Cookbooks didn't endorse nest raiding outright, but folklore and family recipes quietly suggested the eggs tasted richer and creamier than typical store-bought versions, perhaps flavored by adrenaline from evading dive-bombing parents. However, what began as a necessary measure evolved into a serious ecological threat as declining bird populations led to stringent protections. Under today's strict wildlife conservation laws, specifically the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, stealing wild eggs is explicitly illegal, punishable by substantial fines or even imprisonment. Frugality reached extremes during the Great Depression, prompting homemakers to become amateur meat inspectors, carefully sniffing, trimming, and salvaging moldy or spoiled meat, hoping tonight's dinner wouldn't become tomorrow's medical emergency. While modern sensibilities cringe at the thought, families in dire poverty routinely carved away discolored portions, heavily seasoned questionable cuts, then cooked them at high temperatures to minimize risk, though the flavor sometimes left diners longing for less adventurous meals. Depression-era recipe books quietly hinted that spoiled meat could be resurrected by lengthy boiling or vinegar marinades, presumably on the theory that vinegar masked more sins than it absolved. Surprisingly, this wasn't entirely misguided. Boiling could neutralize some bacteria, though it did little to eliminate dangerous toxins already present. Eventually, as understanding of foodborne illnesses grew, health officials recognized consuming spoiled or moldy meat wasn't a test of toughness, but a genuine public health threat. Strict federal food safety regulations emerged, explicitly forbidding restaurants and stores from selling spoiled products and making it illegal to knowingly distribute unsafe meat. During the Great Depression, when pantry shelves often looked emptier than politicians' promises, resourceful cooks headed into the woods, turning nature's mystery produce into dinner. Unregulated foraged mushrooms became commonplace, not from gourmet preference, but simple necessity. Families plucked mushrooms indiscriminately, often without knowing a morel from a death cap, and tossed them confidently into stews or skillets, sautéing them with butter or bacon fat. Old cookbooks optimistically advised, "When in doubt, boil twice," a questionable method that unfortunately didn't neutralize deadly toxins. Despite countless accidental poisonings, mushroom foraging surged in popularity, with amateur gatherers picking anything remotely edible-looking, sometimes proving that bravery and culinary wisdom don't always go hand in hand. By the mid-20th century, authorities took action, heavily restricting mushroom foraging in public parks and forests. Today, selling wild foraged mushrooms without certification is outright illegal in many states, enforced through strict permitting systems intended to protect public health. Imagine rummaging through a pantry full of unlabeled jars, playing culinary roulette with tonight's dinner. Exactly what many Depression-era families did with canned goods without expiration dates or labels. Back then, home canning wasn't just tradition, it was an absolute lifeline, with families routinely sealing meat, vegetables, and fruits inside recycled glass jars or tins, blissfully unconcerned about pesky details like expiration dates or ingredient lists. Dinner often became a surprise mystery meat special. Moms called it creativity. Kids might have called it something else entirely. Cooks would boil these unlabeled contents vigorously, hoping to reduce health risks, though botulism remained a lurking threat even then. Ironically, food safety guidelines of that era were minimal at best, and illnesses frequently resulted from guesswork gone wrong. Eventually, federal food labeling laws and regulations emerged, driven by serious health scares linked directly to unidentified canned goods. Today, selling unlabeled or undated food isn't just unsafe, it's explicitly illegal, with strict FDA requirements on labeling and freshness dates designed to prevent illness and confusion alike. At a time when cooking fuel was expensive and bellies needed filling cheaply, hungry Depression-era Americans occasionally turned to dishes like raw ground beef sandwiches, famously dubbed cannibal sandwiches, to stretch budgets and dodge cooking costs. Despite the grim-sounding nickname, these sandwiches contained nothing scarier than raw beef spread generously on rye bread, topped with onions, salt, and pepper. Surprisingly popular among German and Polish immigrant communities, this dish was proudly served at family gatherings and neighborhood potlucks, accompanied perhaps by hushed whispers questioning the wisdom of skipping the grill altogether. Yet, while Depression-era diners praised the dish's taste and simplicity, modern health officials aren't nearly as enthusiastic about uncooked hamburger. The USDA now strongly discourages consuming raw ground beef due to dangerous bacteria such as E. coli and Salmonella, dangers that Depression-era diners blissfully ignored, possibly chalking stomach aches up to grandma's heavy onions. When families had no extra pennies to spare during the Depression, every ounce of a home-slaughtered hog held culinary promise, including the fat, which found new life in kitchens as rendered lard. Households meticulously melted down pork fat, transforming it into creamy, shelf-stable lard used to fry, bake, or season just about everything, from pie crusts to biscuits. Back then, lard wasn't viewed suspiciously as it is today. Cookbooks proudly praised it as the secret to perfectly flaky pie crusts, biscuits, and even pastries, because sometimes butter wasn't just scarce, it was downright extravagant. Ironically, modern chefs have recently rediscovered lard's benefits in baking, calling it the forgotten fat, but Depression-era cooks never forgot it to begin with. However, rendering lard at home today isn't just frowned upon due to possible kitchen fires or strong odors. It's strongly discouraged or regulated due to contamination concerns. Home-slaughtered pork fat, without USDA inspection, poses serious risks like trichinosis or bacterial contamination. Strict food safety regulations now mandate that commercial lard production adhere to inspection standards, ensuring safety and sanitation. Long before Irish coffee graced brunch menus, Depression-era Americans navigated the dry years of Prohibition by quietly spiking their mugs with homemade liquor, blending two beloved national pastimes into one rebellious concoction: coffee mixed with alcohol. This clandestine cocktail wasn't exactly advertised in Ladies' Home Journal, yet it became a common workaround, disguising illicit moonshine or bootleg whiskey in plain sight during breakfast, proving caffeine was useful for more than just waking up. Preparation was straightforward, though rarely discussed openly. Strong coffee masked the questionable taste of illegal moonshine or bathtub gin, resulting in an eye-opening beverage that delivered both caffeine jitters and an illegal buzz. Newspapers occasionally joked that Prohibition turned average coffee drinkers into accidental outlaws, sipping discreetly to avoid suspicious neighbors or nosy officers. While Prohibition officially ended in 1933, mixing alcohol and coffee never disappeared entirely. It just became legally and socially acceptable again, minus the secrecy. Interestingly, modern laws now regulate alcoholic caffeine mixtures strictly due to legitimate health concerns. Excessive caffeine masks alcohol's intoxicating effects, increasing risky behaviors and health dangers. When Depression-era parents faced exhausted patients and empty pantries, unconventional parenting methods occasionally emerged, including feeding children coffee or liquor to help them sleep. Surprisingly common at the time, this alarming practice stemmed not from malicious intent, but desperate necessity. Families believed small doses of alcohol or diluted coffee soothed hungry or restless children. Typically, mothers mixed coffee heavily diluted with milk, sugar, or even a splash of whiskey to calm crying infants and restless toddlers. Pediatricians of the era often overlooked or humorously downplayed the potential harm, advising anxious parents that a teaspoon of whiskey was just good old-fashioned medicine, not realizing these nightcaps might actually stunt growth or harm young developing brains. Eventually, society and science caught up with common sense, leading lawmakers and child welfare agencies to explicitly classify giving children alcohol as illegal child abuse. Today, state laws universally forbid giving alcohol or caffeine to infants and toddlers, recognizing clear dangers ranging from sleep disturbances to severe developmental damage. When food was scarce and nothing could be wasted, Even discarded bones found their way into soup pots, leading to a common Depression-era practice: boiling wild animal bones for broth without proper cleaning. Families scavenged whatever bones they could find, from hunted game to roadkill, tossing them directly into bubbling water to extract every ounce of nutrition. Long-simmered broths were the foundation of countless meals, stretching meager ingredients into something filling, even if the origins of the bones remained a little too mysterious. However, without modern sanitation practices, these broths often carried more than just flavor. Bacteria, parasites, and even traces of decomposing tissue lurked in improperly cleaned bones, turning survival soup into an unintended health hazard. Despite folk wisdom insisting that boiling kills everything, science eventually proved otherwise. As food safety regulations evolved, health officials cracked down on uninspected animal byproducts, requiring commercial food production to follow strict sanitation guidelines. Today, using uncleaned wild bones for broth is a serious violation of food safety laws, largely banned in restaurants and commercial kitchens due to contamination risks. In the depths of the Great Depression, when store-bought meat was an unattainable luxury, desperate urban dwellers turned to an unlikely source of protein: city pigeons. Once celebrated as a delicacy in fine European cuisine under the name squab, these birds became survival food for struggling families who saw no reason to let an abundance of free-roaming fowl go to waste. Trapping methods varied, from simple box traps to improvised nets, and once caught, pigeons were plucked, gutted, and either roasted whole or stewed with whatever vegetables and seasonings were available. Recipes from the era suggested slow-cooking pigeon to tenderize its notoriously tough texture, though no amount of seasoning could completely disguise the telltale flavor of city living. However, what seemed like an economical solution carried serious health risks. Unlike farm-raised squab, city pigeons scavenge from gutters, dumpsters, and streets, exposing them to toxins, parasites, and diseases like histoplasmosis and salmonella. As urban sanitation improved, laws were enacted to prohibit the trapping and consumption of wild pigeons, recognizing them as disease carriers rather than dinner options. In a period marked by rapid industrialization and cost-cutting innovations, one controversial ingredient left its mark on the processed meat industry: canned pink slime meat. Emerging as a byproduct of the 1960s surge in mass-produced foods, this product was initially celebrated for its efficiency and affordability, which resonated with a public eager for convenience amid economic uncertainties. At a time when regulatory oversight was still developing, its inclusion in everyday meals proceeded with minimal scrutiny, a situation that would later prompt significant policy revisions. Although it provided an economical solution for meat processors, consumers soon discovered that the product harbored potential health risks, ranging from digestive disturbances to concerns over long-term exposure to industrial chemicals. Advertisements touted its value as an innovative way to extend meat supplies, a claim that seemed almost too good to be true once adverse health impacts came to light. As the scientific community began to unravel the full implications of ingesting such additives, regulatory agencies tightened standards and its usage was eventually curtailed in many applications. The saga of lawn darts, or jarts, as they were colloquially known, is a somber chapter in toy history. Introduced in the 1960s, these metal-tipped darts, intended for outdoor play, soon revealed a darker side. After causing numerous injuries and tragically fatalities, lawn darts were banned in 1988 in the United States. This ban served as a watershed moment in toy safety, illustrating the critical need for oversight and regulation in children's playthings. The story of lawn darts remains a powerful reminder of the responsibilities manufacturers and regulators bear in ensuring the well-being of young enthusiasts. Ortolans suffered the worst of animal cruelty in a way that really makes you realize no dish is ever worth that kind of torture to another being. Ortolans themselves are these very small songbirds that get imported from France, and they really are about the size of an average thumb. Ortolans were prized for their flavor more than anything else, and eating them was considered to be a pastime of royals reserved exclusively for them. The way it would be prepared was sick, with the tiny things first being blinded to be overfed and then being thrown in brandy before they got marinated live. That's enough to make us lose our appetite for sure, and luckily it was banned in 1999 due to animal abuse. By the 1960s, soda had become more than just a refreshing treat. It was a cultural icon. With its bold flavors, flashy advertisements, and promises of instant energy, it was a staple of American life. But some brands took that last promise a little too far. High-caffeine soda wasn't just about a quick pick-me-up. Some of these carbonated concoctions packed as much caffeine as several cups of coffee in a single bottle. At a time when regulations were still catching up to the booming food and beverage industry, caffeine content wasn't something most consumers thought to question. For those needing an extra boost, whether for a long shift, a late-night study session, or just to keep up with the fast pace of modern life, these sodas were a tempting choice. But what went down easy didn't always sit well. Excessive caffeine consumption could lead to heart palpitations, anxiety, and even dependency. Some drinkers learned the hard way that too much of a good thing wasn't always a good thing. As research into caffeine's effects grew, regulations tightened. Today, sodas still contain caffeine, but the extreme levels once found in certain brands have been curbed. Polly Pocket, a beloved toy line that captivated children with its miniature dolls and accessories, faced a significant challenge in 2007. The quick-click versions of these toys, designed for easy outfit changes with magnetic accessories, soon revealed a critical flaw. The magnets, prone to detaching during play, posed serious ingestion risks, leading to surgeries and heightened safety concerns. This incident highlighted the unforeseen dangers of magnetic toys and prompted a recall, underscoring the importance of rigorous product testing and design evaluation. The Polly Pocket recall serves as a crucial reminder in the toy industry to prioritize the safety of even the smallest components, ensuring that children's play remains safe and enjoyable. In the mid-20th century, sweetness wasn't just a preference, it was a selling point. Few products embodied this better than sweetened condensed milk with excessive sugar. A staple in many households, this thick, syrupy dairy product was beloved for its versatility, affordability, and long shelf life. It made its way into pies, coffee, and even baby formula. But for all its convenience, there was one problem. Some brands packed in so much sugar that it was closer to candy than milk. During the 1960s, food manufacturers weren't required to disclose sugar content as rigorously as they are today. Without standardized labeling, some versions contained sugar levels far beyond what would now be considered safe for daily consumption. The excess wasn't just about taste, it was a cheap preservative, extending the product's shelf life and making it more appealing to budget-conscious shoppers. But as studies linked high sugar intake to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease, health experts began sounding the alarm. By the late 20th century, regulations introduced stricter labeling requirements, and sugar content in condensed milk was brought under control. The very last item on our list is candy cigarettes, which you should not mix up with candy-flavored cigarettes. These were actual candies that were shaped like cigarettes and made out of sugar, chocolate, and bubble gum wrapped in edible paper. They had powdered sugar lacing the wrapper too, which made it possible for the user to puff a cloud out, but instead of smoke, it would be sugar. The entire product was meant to imitate the experience of a smoke and hopefully work as a crutch to help people quit, but it only had the opposite effect. Many critics thought it was making children numb to cigarettes, increasing their curiosity in the substance, and causing those who already have smokers in the home to be more likely to try it. There was a lot of controversy surrounding these candies, and it did not help that they were marketed so similar to cigarette brands. All in all, not a good look for a product aimed at kids. Eventually, they were banned as part of the efforts to eradicate smoking. And we gotta say, there are a few things in history America has been as thorough about weeding out as its brief fling with smoking. Bright, bold, and eye-catching, color mattered in the 1960s food industry, and few additives were as widely used as red No. 2 or amaranth. From candies to cake frosting, this synthetic dye gave processed foods an irresistible vibrancy. It was cheap, effective, and made everything look more appealing. But what manufacturers saw as a marketing advantage, scientists would later recognize as a serious health risk. At the time, food dyes weren't scrutinized as heavily as they are today. The general belief was that if a product made it to store shelves, it had to be safe. Red number 2 was everywhere, with little concern for long-term effects. But as research advanced, animal studies suggested a troubling connection between this popular dye and potential carcinogenic properties. Though the data wasn't conclusive for humans, the idea of a cancer-causing colorant lurking in everyday foods was enough to raise alarms. Public pressure mounted, and by the 1970s, the FDA banned red number 2 in the US, following similar actions in Europe. While other artificial dyes remained in use, this case marked a turning point in food safety regulations. Trans fats were unfortunately not just prevalent in margarine production, but many other foods like fried roll pulls as well, which meant that culling the problem all across the American nation may be more challenging than the government initially thought. Basically, if something had liquid oil becoming solid fat, it had trans fats, and that means it had a health risk worth considering. Fried roll-ups happened to be a delicious snack that many people would enjoy in their free time or when they found a stall with the fragrance of a good roll-up. Although businesses like that would suffer the same as margarine producers did when the FDA put a lid on the entire situation with trans fats, and we cannot be happier that they did. Look, it is not like we do not enjoy our fair share of fried food, but the fried roll-up pulls just had too many trans fats for something that was available readily and fast. The smoky aroma of grilled meat has been a staple of backyard cookouts for generations. But in the 1960s, few people realized that along with the rich, charred flavor came an unwanted ingredient: benzopyrene. This carcinogenic compound, produced when fat drips onto an open flame, was an unavoidable byproduct of grilling. At the time, the science behind food safety was still catching up, and the risks of long-term exposure weren't widely understood. People focused on the taste, not the chemistry. Grilled meats were everywhere, from summer barbecues to fast food chains expanding their menus. That irresistible crust created through high-heat cooking was part of the appeal. But scientists later discovered that benzopyrene, a type of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon, could bind to DNA and increase the risk of cancer. The more charred the meat, the higher the concentration. Yet in the mid-century dining landscape, warnings about grilling techniques weren't exactly at the forefront of public health discussions. Regulations have since evolved, with agencies like the FDA and WHO advising moderation when it comes to heavily charred foods. While grilling remains a beloved cooking method, the way we approach it has changed. The Little Lady Stove, a reflection of the 1950s fascination with miniature, functional household items for children, was essentially a scaled-down version of a real stove. It allowed children to cook and bake using actual heat, bringing a sense of realism to playtime. Despite its popularity, the inherent dangers of children using a device that reached high temperatures led to concerns over burns and accidents. The discontinuation of the Little Lady Stove due to safety risks and the shift in societal attitudes towards more cautious children's play highlights the evolving understanding of safety in toys. It underscores the importance of creating child-friendly toys that inspire imaginative play without exposing young users to unnecessary risks. One would assume that even more obvious than raw milk are the negative consequences of smoking. But just like how vaping today is marketed as a less dangerous alternative to tobacco and nicotine, Clove cigarettes were meant to be a healthier option to go for if you wanted to smoke. The thing is, whether you get your nicotine from a machine with a coil or cigarettes made from dried cloves, also known as Kretex, the danger is still the same. Actually, in this case, it was probably worse since studies proved that clove cigarettes contain more tar, nicotine, and carbon monoxide than traditional cigarettes. Every single Kretex was the equivalent of maybe 2 cigarettes in a sense, and that definitely does not scream healthier alternative to us. It is a good thing America ran an intensive anti-smoking campaign and conducted many prominent studies, because if the side effects were still unknown up till now, like they were in the 70s, we would be having even worse variations, which hopefully can make you understand why those anti-smoking ads were so rigorous. It became a serious problem for America eventually. Preserving food has always been a challenge, but some solutions turned out to be worse than the problem itself. In the 1960s, some manufacturers used formaldehyde, yes, the same chemical used to embalm corpses, as a preservative in food packaging and even certain processed meats. The reasoning was simple. Formaldehyde could prevent spoilage and extend shelf life, making products more durable for transportation and storage. Unfortunately, what was good for logistics wasn't exactly good for human health. At the time, food safety regulations were still evolving. The long-term effects of exposure to certain chemicals weren't fully understood, and manufacturers often took advantage of the regulatory gaps. Formaldehyde wasn't just a byproduct. It was deliberately applied to some food products, keeping meats from spoiling and even preventing mold growth in baked goods. The catch? It's a known carcinogen and toxic in even small doses. Though its risks were largely unknown to the public, scientists began raising alarms about its potential to cause respiratory issues, digestive distress, and even cancer. By the late 1970s, stricter regulations forced food manufacturers to abandon its use. Moon Shoes mini trampolines for your feet promised a gravity-defying experience that tantalized children with dreams of bouncing higher than ever before. Originally introduced in the 1970s, they were discontinued due to safety concerns, but later reimagined with improvements. This evolution of Moon Shoes illustrates the toy industry's capacity for reinvention, addressing safety concerns without stifling the spirit of innovation. It demonstrates a commitment to enhancing play through technology while prioritizing the well-being of its young users, embodying the delicate balance between fostering imaginative play and ensuring safety in an ever-evolving landscape of childhood entertainment. Haggis is a pudding that is made from some pretty different ingredients than your usual cinnamon apple concoction that your grandmother whips up. This one has sheep hearts, liver as well as sheep lung, mixed together with spices, onions, and oatmeal of all things. A weirder combination for a pudding may not be discovered, at least by us, for a long while. But apparently this dish was very popular. How it fits into the definition of a pudding is a bit beyond us, as it sounds more like a porridge. But whatever it was, people finished bowls of the stuff. Sheep meat has a risk of carrying a disease called scrapie, though, and that is why the FDA banned any kind of sheep lung products in America, as that had the highest risk. Lungs of most animals are probably not safe to eat. Just a guess. By the 1960s, coffee wasn't just a beverage, it was a way of life. Americans were drinking it by the gallon, fueling workdays, social gatherings, and late-night study sessions. But what most people didn't know was that some brands were using unregulated chemicals in coffee to speed up roasting and enhance flavor. Efficiency was the goal, and if a few extra compounds made the process faster, all the better. At least that was the thinking at the time. Roasting coffee is an art, but it's also a time-consuming process. To cut costs and maximize production, some manufacturers turned to chemical accelerants. These additives helped beans roast quicker and gave them a consistent, rich color. The problem? Some of these chemicals weren't exactly meant for human consumption. Without strict oversight, certain compounds made it into the final product, leaving consumers unknowingly sipping on substances that hadn't been tested for long-term safety. As scientific studies advanced, concerns over these chemicals grew. Some were linked to respiratory issues, while others raised red flags for potential toxicity. By the late 20th century, regulators stepped in, banning unsafe additives and enforcing stricter guidelines on coffee production. The Slipn Slide, another Wham-O classic, epitomizes summer fun with its straightforward yet exhilarating concept. This water-lubricated slide offers an adrenaline rush as users glide across the lawn. Yet, it's accompanied by a cautionary note, especially for adult users, due to recalls linked to severe spinal and neck injuries. This situation illuminates the complexities of toy design, stressing the necessity for age-appropriate products and explicit usage guidelines. Despite these challenges, the Slipn Slide remains a beloved fixture of summer, symbolizing the toy industry's dedication to merging enjoyment with safety, ensuring playtime is both thrilling and secure for every age. So, let's take a look at milk. This should not be too bad, right? It is one of the first things humans ever took from the planet, and one of the things we have been consuming since forever. Unfortunately, unpasteurized milk can be pretty risky, and this was a surprise to most people. Naturally, too, because nobody really associates health concerns with milk, but people in the 70s used to drink it raw, which was the problem. This caused enough cases of bacterial contamination that the FDA eventually banned the sale in virtually all states. It is not legal to sell milk in grocery stores if it is raw, and any raw milk purchasing is done strictly on farms now. Long before tobacco was widely recognized as a public health hazard, it was used in ways that would raise eyebrows today. One of the strangest? Tobacco-flavored cough syrup. At a time when smoking was still being advertised by doctors and marketed as a remedy for stress, it wasn't all that shocking to find tobacco making its way into medicinal syrups. After all, if it was good enough for a cigarette, why not a sore throat? Throughout the early to mid-20th century, cough syrups were often packed with ingredients that, in hindsight, sound more like the makings of a problem than a cure. Some contained opiates, others had alcohol, and a few, incredibly, were infused with nicotine or tobacco extracts. The idea was that the plant's natural properties could help suppress coughs and open up airways. And while the logic might have sounded reasonable at the time, the reality was far from beneficial. By the 1960s and 70s, the tide had begun to turn against tobacco. Research linked it to lung disease, cancer, and addiction, and regulators cracked down. By the late 20th century, tobacco-flavored medicines had all but disappeared. Csi Fingerprint Examination Kit, based on the popular TV show, offered kids a chance to dive into the world of forensic science, analyzing fingerprints with a dusting powder that alarmingly contained asbestos. Revealed in 2007, this discovery prompted urgent recalls and a re-evaluation of safety standards in toy manufacturing. This incident serves as a critical lesson in the oversight of materials used in children's products, emphasizing the necessity for thorough testing and transparency. The recall of the CSI kit illustrates the paramount importance of safeguarding children's health and well-being, ensuring that educational toys not only enrich minds, but also adhere to the highest safety protocols. Raw milk cheese went through pretty much the same ordeal as milk when it got banned for almost the same charges. Anything should be Googled or at least researched somewhat if you are going to consume it raw, especially things that go through an entire process like cheese. Cheese made from raw milk had much higher chances of food poisoning and stomach issues in the populace, even though it led to the cheese being thicker overall. These small differences, which give businesses a USP, are often not worth dealing with all the pain that might come as a package deal with them. For a little texture and flavor, you may open yourself up to a dozen downsides. For much of the 20th century, pork was a dinnertime staple, served in everything from sausage links to Sunday roasts. But in the 1960s, a hidden danger lurked in every bite: trichinosis-infected pork. Caused by a parasitic roundworm, trichinosis was a serious risk for anyone eating raw or undercooked pork, and back then, proper cooking guidelines weren't always followed as strictly as they are today. The appeal of pork was obvious. It was affordable, versatile, and packed with flavor. But many traditional preparations, such as homemade sausages and rare-cooked pork dishes, created the perfect conditions for infection. Once inside the body, the parasite could cause fever, muscle pain, and in severe cases, organ damage. The issue wasn't fully understood by the general public, and food safety regulations were still catching up. By the 1970s, major reforms in pork processing and stricter USDA inspections dramatically reduced the risk. Freezing pork at regulated temperatures killed the parasite, and public awareness campaigns taught consumers to cook their meat to safer temperatures. Mini hammocks, introduced as the perfect backyard accessory for kids seeking the comfort and adventure of their very own hammock, quickly became a sought-after item. However, their design, lacking spreader bars to keep the hammock open, posed a significant risk. Between 1984 and 1995, the tragic loss of at least 12 children due to strangulation led to the recall of over 3 million units. This sobering episode underscores the critical importance of safety considerations in the design of children's products. It serves as a stark reminder that even the simplest designs must be scrutinized for potential hazards, ensuring the joy of childhood is preserved without compromising safety. In the 70s, the phrase, "let's get some shark fin soup," was not really that out of pocket. A lot of people enjoyed bowls of this at many restaurants across the USA, but local shark populations had to pay the price in a pretty nasty way as they got their fins removed and then were left in the ocean. While they were a tradition in some cultures, their use was not nearly as intense as the businesses constantly asking for more fins. Eventually, the Senate passed the Shark Fins Elimination Act, which thankfully now makes shark fin products illegal. Over the years, the constant efforts by hunters and other people looking to make a quick paycheck have endangered species, and today the number of sharks is at a record low. Speaking of Aqua Dots, a creative toy allowing children to create colorful designs that would bind together when sprayed with water, became a source of concern when ingested beads released a chemical akin to a potent drug. The 2007 recall of Aqua Dots after reports of children falling into comas or becoming violently ill highlighted a significant oversight in product safety and chemical use in toys. This incident underscores the crucial need for stringent chemical safety standards and rigorous testing in toy manufacturing. Aqua Dots' recall is a stark reminder of the responsibility manufacturers bear to ensure that innovative toys are not only engaging and educational, but, above all, safe for their intended young audience. Sassafras trees are deeply cherished cultural items because of their solace in the symbolism of many cultures, as well as the infamous Sassafras Tea that we keep hearing people raving about. A cup of this in the 70s was all you needed to fix your soul and wipe away the exhaustion of last week. However, the tree and tea itself may not be so healthy. The tea at least contains a carcinogen called safrole, which is found in large amounts in the tea, thereby making it pretty unsafe as well as a bad idea if you have any pre-existing breathing problems. Besides, some studies found that the root bark of the tree and the oil it secretes can be linked to cancer or liver damage. Maybe we should reevaluate how healthy this piece of foliage is? Few scents are as instantly recognizable as the rich, buttery aroma of freshly popped popcorn. But in the mid-20th century, that unmistakable smell often came from a chemical rather than dairy. Artificial butter flavoring, or diacetyl, became a common ingredient in microwave popcorn, margarine, and other processed foods, offering an affordable way to mimic the real thing. At a time when convenience foods were on the rise, manufacturers saw it as a perfect shortcut, one that delivered full-flavored appeal without the cost of actual butter. But while diacetyl made foods taste richer, it also carried risks that wouldn't come to light for decades. In industrial settings, workers exposed to airborne diacetyl began developing severe respiratory illnesses, including a rare condition later dubbed popcorn lung. The name might sound cartoonish, but the effects were anything but. Prolonged exposure could cause irreversible lung damage, leading to chronic coughing and shortness of breath. Regulatory agencies eventually intervened, restricting its use in certain food production environments and mandating safer handling practices. While diacetyl is still found in some products today, many companies have removed or